great to see you again, and welcome to the last sea story of 2024. It's just hard to believe we've gotten to that point already. This is actually, we are in our third year, and we've met some amazing people, and tonight we are going to meet yet another one, my friend Alan Mulholland. And Alan has done a lot of cool stuff, and Alan, say hi to everybody.
Hello, everybody. And Duncan, thank you very much for having me on. It's a real pleasure.
I certainly wouldn't have missed it for the world. I think I've been chasing you for about 6 months. Last I remember, I read an article about you in Spin Sheet down here in Annapolis, and I thought, what an interesting story. And you're a slippery guy, but I got a hold of you finally.
Well, it's a little difficult when you're sailing on a 21-foot boat, to maintain communications across the ocean.
Loud and clear, loud and clear. Now, you've been posting as you've gone, and I think you told me, what are you doing Thursday? You're posting your
So,
last.
so this coming Thursday, I'll be releasing the video that actually is the end of the Atlantic crossing. It's when Wave Rover actually makes landfall in Baltimore, Ireland. And for all those listeners out there wondering about the name Baltimore, the Baltimore City in the United States, that's where I more or less left from last year and then sailed across the Atlantic and ended up in Baltimore, Ireland. Baltimore, Ireland, as I love to tell people, was the original Baltimore.
Just and take that. Well, that's great. Now, Alan, before we get too far in, can you kind of give me a little, like a button, a way to say, this is who I am and this is what I've been doing with my life as far as this sort of crossing goes? Because I know this wasn't your first.
Right. So the whole thing starts about when I was 12, 13 years old. I joined Sea Cadets when I was in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada.
Yeah.
And I was sailing dinghies. And then later I was fortunate enough to be accepted to the Royal Military College. Now, the Royal Military College, for folks who don't know, that's Canada's equivalent to West Point or Annapolis. We just have the one military college in Canada. So it was a huge honor. And I was on the sailing team on the while I was there. And of course, I was destined to be in the Navy. I graduated. I was a commissioned officer. And at the end of my service commitment, I left. And, my whole life, if anything, has been sailing to windward. And when you sail to windward, you're tacking all the time. So I did this huge tack after leaving the military, and I started apprenticing as a carpenter. And I did a 4-year carpentry apprenticeship. And it was at the end of that, I tacked again and I started building my first boat, which I called Wren. And I think we have a picture of it coming up.
Yeah. Well, that is very exciting. Before we get too deep into it, everyone, we're going to make sure everything's working. I am running a chat screen and I'm running a Q&A screen, questions. So if we all would not mind, head on over to your chat screen and just type in what town you're signing in from so I can make sure everything works. And I will do the same myself. And here we go. Oh, Cape May, Annapolis, boom. Hello from Salisbury, Alexander. Oh, that is so much fun. This is one of the best parts for me. Alan, I love this. Great. Well, thank you, everyone. That is so cool. We have people from all over the country and sometimes even overseas. And that's really pretty cool, too.
Fantastic.
Great to see you all. Well, my friend, what do you say we dig into it, huh?
Dig into it.
Do we do the meat and potatoes thing? All right, let me get over here and we'll share that screen out and we will be ready to roll. And who is that handsome guy? I just don't know. How does he do it?
Well, that photo, as it turns out, that's one of my favorites. That is after 15 days at sea out of the Azores and arriving in Baltimore. That's just probably 4 or 5 hours before I finally arrive in Baltimore. And I'm still looking pretty fresh and clean shaven. In fact, I even cut my hair on that route. But the story actually starts way up in Prince Edward Island, just up there in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And then I went through to Halifax, and then from Halifax sailed down the whole East Coast. And that was a huge adventure just in itself. You know, from Halifax, I sailed to a little place called Stonington. And I picked Stonington because there was a fellow there named Harold, and Harold was such a great contributor and supporter of Wave Rover. He helped me out. He's a canvas worker. He made my bunks for me, the mattresses and the mattress covers and a bunch of other canvas work. He drove them all the way up to Nova Scotia to deliver them. And so I thought, well, I'll make my first stop there. It was terrific. He had laid on all these get-togethers for me, and I met a heap of people, and it really set the tone for the whole voyage, because after that, I only went to ports where people had invited me. So after Stonington, I headed down the Long Island Sound and into New York, and then I anchored at Coney Island and left Coney Island and headed down the New Jersey coast and then to Chesapeake Bay, eventually going to Baltimore, where I did a refit. We'll see some pictures of that. And then after Baltimore, sailed down the rest of the lower Chesapeake, which was fantastic, meeting people along the way, people who had got a hold of me and said, you know, come and visit. And then I left from Virginia Beach, heading to the Azores, and then from the Azores over to Baltimore, Ireland. But that's the last passage I made, ocean passage. But we're going to start off, Duncan, if you don't mind, back in 1995 at the first voyage.
Well, I think it's a wonderful segue. We will do that, and it looks like someone has asked, did you stop in the Azores or did you just do a drive-by? We can probably address that a little bit later. Having been to Stonington, I think another part of this first screen might be to describe how you did fundraising, or do you want to do that later on? And
I'll do that later on when we see the inside
of
the.
Here we go.
So what we're looking at is a 26-foot steel sloop, and that's the first boat I built. And it didn't take long to build. It took just a little over a year. And that photograph is actually taken, that's Moresby Island behind me, and that's Australia. So at this point, I've sailed that boat right across the Pacific from Nanaimo, British Columbia, all the way, I sailed to Hawaii, and then from Hawaii to the Gilbert Islands, and then from the Gilbert Islands down to Australia. So it was a number of big, long passages. And then I lived on the boat in Australia for about a year and a half. So that would be from 95 to almost 98. And that was the first passage. So anybody who's curious, the owners of that boat, because I ended up selling it in Australia, they got a hold of me a couple of years ago. They said they love the boat. It's still going strong. They still live in the Brisbane area. And I was delighted to hear that they liked it and that the boat was still in tip-top shape.
That's remarkable. And you built that boat and then just pushed off and sailed away, huh?
And even though that has self-steering on the back, a wind vane, I actually call that the Mark II, and we'll talk about that a bit later. The Mark II was a dismal failure, didn't work very well. In fact, it was the Mark I was what I sailed across the Pacific with, and the Mark I is nothing more than sheet to tiller steering. So anybody who thinks it can't be done with no wind vane crossing an ocean solo with just sheet to tiller. Now, of course, it's a lot more complicated than just tying a rope off to a sheet and to the tiller. You have to have the right amount of counterbalance with a collection of bungee cords. And I had a big collection of bungee cords, which I'd have to switch out depending on the tack and depending on the wind strength. So it really gave me that feeling that if anything happened to the steering, I could always switch back to sheet to tiller and get a boat ashore.
Amazing. Amazing. Oh, who's
And
that?
that's a picture that was taken shortly after arriving in Brisbane, Australia. And of course, this was taken in the mid 90s, and you can tell by the mustache there. We Magnum PI was a big deal in that time, and I think I'm a ginger-haired Magnum at that point. But I don't know. I felt really great at that point. I had just crossed the ocean. It was the passage between the island of Tarawa in the Gilbert Islands and Brisbane, Australia was 52 days. So that was a 52-day solo passage, the longest I've ever done.
I don't know how you did it, but I don't know how do you put enough food on?
Ah, food is easy. Food is easy. We'll and
Really?
we'll get to that a bit later.
All right, let's take a look.
So this is me building the boat, and it's called a Brent Swain 26, and it's a very easy boat to build. What we're looking at is about, I'd say 4 weeks into the build, and it already looked like that. And I'm just building this in the parking lot of a marina. I've rented this tiny little space on the grass, and like I said, over a period of a year, I have built this boat entirely, plus the inside, plus rigged it and got it ready to go to sea. So it was a fairly fast project. And let's see the next photo there, Duncan. So it's another welding one. And it's a bilge keeler. So we're looking at one of the bilge keels on the boat, and it's a steel boat, but it has a hard chine to it. And that's part of what makes it really easy to build. And then in the next photo, that's what the inside looked like. So it was nice and bright and open because it's a steel boat. It didn't need a lot of supports on the inside, but that what we're looking at to the right side of the photo, that white pipe, that's the compression pipe that's taking the support from the mast because the mast is deck stepped. But apart from that, there's not a whole lot of structure on the inside. You'll see those little pipes just on the aft end of the bunks. Those are supporting the side decks. Very simple boat, easy to make, and incredibly seaworthy.
Hmm. Now, Alan, did you learn to weld in the Navy or?
No, no, no. I was actually a bridge watchkeeping officer, so most of my work was on the navigation and the navigation
Hmm.
side. So, and when I did my 4-year apprenticeship as a carpenter, it was all carpentry. So what I did was I bought a welding machine, just not expensive, a Lincoln arc welder, and I hired a guy that was familiar with building these boats for 3 weeks. That's all I could afford. And in those 3 weeks, I you know, just studied exactly what he was doing. I would ask questions. And then every evening when he went home, I would practice. And then next morning, I'd say, "What do you think of that?" And he'd say, "That's rubbish," and I'd learn from that. And then by the end of the 3 weeks, he left and I took over. It was that
That's
easy.
that's a great story. That's a great story. I got a couple questions that have drifted across with this picture here. Um,
Yeah.
did you use any type of insulation to
Yes.
keep
Yeah.
condensation down?
Yeah. So the whole boat was coated in spray foam, and then I had furring strips already welded to it that I could attach wood to. So it's almost like two boats. So you've
Hmm.
got the steel hull, then spray foam throughout the whole boat, with the exception of the bilge area, and then a wooden boat is built on the inside, just light plywood.
Uh, Another question came in, why a deck step as opposed to a through step? Keel step.
Oh, just the whole idea was to keep any openings in the boat down, just down. So there are no through hulls either. There's a tiny bracket on the back end for an outboard. So I mean, this was a shoestring budget. I'm just a young man uh, who can just barely afford this, and I'm leaving Canada just with a few $100s in my pocket. But I do have a trade. I'm a carpenter, so I was planning to work as a carpenter in the places that I arrived. and it worked out exactly like that. And in those days, I mean, we talked about this, Duncan. Big inspirations for me were the books by Lynn and Larry Pardey, and those meant so much to me. The way they would, build everything themselves and go on these adventures and make the adventures pay, in the form of getting a job
Yeah,
when you get there.
they're
And that's
remarkable.
and that's the way, I wasn't the only one. I met other people doing the very same thing as I traveled, and people respected it back then. Like when I got to Australia, I worked in two different boat yards, and I learned a ton when I was working there, and they were happy that, because the boat was my calling card. They could see that, not only did I have experience as a sailor, but I had already built a boat, and they could see my woodwork. So
Yeah, that's absolutely the way to learn. Just get out there in the yard. It's the way I started in all things. Let's see what else we have in here. Oh my goodness.
so this is the last picture. So this is just sailing down the Brisbane River. I'm actually heading out to Moresby Bay at this point, but that's Brisbane in the background, and just to the left side of the picture and the river, you're just seeing a few masts. And there were a number of moorings in the river at that point, and I was tied up to those moorings for the better part of, I'd say, 9 to 10 months. And it was a beautiful spot right across from the botanical gardens,
Oh,
very reasonable, the mooring space, and just met a ton of interesting people. One of those people was James Warham from the James Warham Catamarans. And this is the way the story went. I just happened to be there. I had this massive Canadian flag hanging off the transom, and this little Zodiac was going by, ran out of gas, and there's a fair bit of current in the river, and they're floating. They grabbed onto my mooring line, and he says, "Did you sail this boat all the way from Canada?" And I said, "Yes, I did." And he goes, "That's my boat down there," because I didn't know who he was, and it was the 63-foot, I think it's called a Pahi, and they had just built that, and they were on this massive cruise, and it was after the fact I learned who he was, and I thought, wow, that is really cool. You meet some of the coolest people when you're on these trips.
that's a great story. My goodness gracious. Oh, goodness. Let's see what we got here. Oh my God.
So now, fast forward. This is this is Wave Rover, and Wave Rover is a Contessa 26, and I picked it up for somewhere around $3,000. And the reason is she was taking on water. She didn't have an engine, and I thought that's perfect. That's perfect for what I want. It's well in the budget. Picked it up in Ottawa and had it transported back to Prince Edward Island. And then I worked on it for a year. So I ripped out the hatch and I put on that, which I call the Wave Rover hatch. And it gives me full headroom on the inside, and I can look around, I can dog it down. I also made sure I ground down the hull deck joint, which was a big job, and glassed over that. And then I also developed the Mark III, which was the steering system. And the Mark III, we'll be talking about this a bit later, but it was a real game changer for me as far as sailing went.
I can believe it. I mean, crossing that amount of ocean, you've got to have something to help steer with that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
So this is a picture taken on Wave Rover, and I have sailed out of Halifax, and I'm en route to Flores, which is the westernmost island of the Azores. And the port that I'm heading to is called Lajes. And I'm probably, a little more than halfway there. And this massive pod of dolphins starts swimming by. And so that got my attention. I got up on deck with my camera, and I realized that the dolphins were just leading the way. And it was actually a huge, I guess you'd call them, pod of whales. And they stretched as far as the eye could see. And it turns out they're fin whales. And the adults were on the exterior, and I'm more or less right dab in the middle of
Oh,
this this big. I'm not sure if whales are in a school or,
I
but
think they
anyway,
pod. I think they
a
pod.
pod. So a massive pod, like
Ah,
it would have been in the hundreds, I would think.
that's a once in
So
a lifetime experience.
oh, absolutely. So these are the adolescents, and they were much bigger than Wave Rover. And I just happened to have the camera rolling. It's a more impressive bit of video than it is picture, because in the video, you'll see this whale come up, breach, and then go back down, and you'll see its eye open and close. It's quite impressive. So,
Wow.
and you're right. That was you see those things. You've got to capture the moment because they don't happen that often.
Well, they
I
don't.
have seen other whales at sea, but never that close. That's about 20 feet off my transom.
Incredible.
Yeah,
Incredible. Once in a lifetime.
yeah.
Where are
So,
we?
so this is Wave Rover on the bottom left there, and in the background you see the pilot boat. This is the port of Lajes, and it's the only port. It's the only good-sized port on the island of Flores in the Azores. So the Azores is made up of a number of islands. I can't remember exactly. I think it's five,
Yeah.
and there's only one all-weather port, and it's the port of Horta, which is very famous, but that's on the next island, Fayal. So I'm on the island that's west of Fayal called Flores. And it's a beautiful, beautiful island. Far less people visit it than Horta. So there were only two other sailboats in there when I was there. The rest are all fishermen.
Yeah.
And the port captain came to me and said, there's a hurricane approaching. You ought to leave. And I said, oh, absolutely.
Okay.
And so he shows me the weather, and the other two sailboats left that day, and I left a few hours after them. So I'm the last sailboat out of there. And the name of the hurricane was Lorenzo. Now here's the thing: hurricanes don't come up to the Azores. The Azores are considered a hurricane-free zone. In
Yeah.
fact, no one could remember a hurricane ever landing in the Azores. So, I mean, they get plenty of Atlantic storms, fierce storms, but not hurricanes. So I left the port of Lajes, and I think it's about 200 miles to Horta. And so snap up the next picture.
Sure. Absolutely. Oh,
And 6 days later, that's what the port looks like, and you can see that's the pilot boat that's smashed up on the dock right there. So
yeah.
that,
This
that
is
all
wonderful.
that concrete work in the background, that was massive concrete work, like big ships would tie up there, totally smashed by the hurricane. Unbelievable, unbelievable power.
Crazy. Let's go back for a second.
Yeah.
So that wall, is it the wall I'm seeing here?
That wall is that's the inner wall, and that's gone. But in the background, that wall that you can see that's all broken, you don't even see that in the first picture. That's the other side of the first wall.
That's crazy.
Yeah, very powerful storm.
Mm, mm, mm. Where are we
So
now?
then, so now we're in Horta. So I've sailed out of Lajes. I'm in Horta, and this is just after the hurricane has worked its way through. We still got a pretty good wind, 200 miles away, and that's why you can see all the ropes that are all doubled up around Wave Rover. And also, I've taken the boom down, and I just put the dinghy back on. I had stored the dinghy ashore, and I had borrowed extra fenders from friends, good friends that everywhere I go, I meet people, and I'm in touch with them to this day. That was back, let me try to remember, I think either 2018,
Is that
2019,
right?
around there. Yeah.
I
But
remember.
in the background to the left, that peak you see, that's the island of Pico. That's the next island in the Azores. And a little bit of trivia, that's the highest point in Portugal, because Portugal owns these islands, and that's the highest peak.
As
in
you
all
said,
of
you're absolutely right. Your story makes me think of that great quote by Larry Pardey who says, There are no strangers. There are only friends we haven't met yet.
That's so true. That's
It's,
so true in the sailing world.
yeah, it is true. Let's see.
So this is an interesting picture. There's a lot happening here. So that's a following sea, and it's a breaking wave. And in photographs like this, you don't get the proper scale, but that's about to swamp my cockpit. And this is the day after I got hit by a rogue wave. Now, these are reinforced trade winds, somewhere around 25 to 30 knots, but they are trade winds. They're steady. And this is in between the Canaries and Martinique. So about 2/3 of that distance, it was at night, and I heard it coming. It sounded like this massive freight train, and it picked me up and then just dropped me straight down. And this was not just a knockdown. I've had knockdowns before in the Pacific and in the Atlantic, but this, and which is the nature of having a small boat, by the way.
Yeah.
Small boats can get a knockdown a whole lot easier than a big boat. But this was a different animal altogether. This would be a once in a lifetime event where you get picked up by a rogue wave, something that came in on the beam, even though all the seas were quartering, and they. So this was it was a bizarre thing. Anyway, picked the boat up, slammed it down. I cracked 2 ribs. My tablet with my brand new tablet, I might say, it was only 2 weeks old, with all my charts on it, came flying across the cabin, even though it was in a special holder for Samsung iPads or whatever they're called, tablets. Somehow the force, it was tremendous force. And the first thing I did, and water came in, of course, the first thing I did was go into damage control mode, which is, it's kind of goes back to my Navy training, I think. You don't lose a beat. Boom, checking to make sure that the doghouse is still attached, because that's how loud and destructive this sounded. You don't know if that's the first in a train of these, or what's going to happen next. And it was reinforced trades to start with. It wasn't something Mickey Mouse. Like, these are 27, 28 knots to start with, and which is a lot in a small boat. And anyway, you can see on the rail there, if you look carefully underneath that solar panel, that's all bent. It's got a great big curve to it, as does the one
right in here, right?
Yeah, and that was from the force of that being dropped off the top of a very big wave, probably the frothy bit of the wave, which wouldn't have the buoyancy to hold a boat, and you just fall straight through. I mean, that's what I think happened.
Yeah.
And that solar panel is totally kaput as well. It's all smashed from this.
Well, I'm looking down here too. This is all crushed.
It's a mess there. And anybody who's interested, you can go and find this video where I do a pretty good assessment, with the camera the following day. But the wind vane is also knocked out of kilter. But that wind vane is so indestructible, even though it's knocked out of kilter. I was still able to adjust it to carry on. I still had another.
That's a wind vane you built yourself, isn't it?
It's I call it the Mark III, and that's that wind vane. So I developed that based on the previous voyages, and talking to some really cool old timers, actually, who, all these ideas were germinating for years, and then it came to fruition with the Mark III. And the Mark III, well, it proved to be so good. Everybody kept asking me, can you sketch it out? And I did, and I put the plans up. There's a link on my YouTube channel, and I think they're $45 or $40 for the digital plans. And those plans, there's been like almost 600 that have sold now.
Isn't that something?
And a lot of folks have built them and sent me pictures and videos of them using them. So you're liable to see the Mark III in every ocean at this point.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. Oh my goodness, it's time for a commercial break. All right, my friends, everybody hold on tight. Let's hope we get one.
This is a pitch to ask you to join us at the American Schooner Association. Founded in 1972, the American Schooner Association is dedicated to the history, preservation, and promotion of the schooner rig. You don't need to be a schooner owner to join the organization, just to be interested in these beautiful boats. As time marches forward, the role that schooners played in the history of our country is fading too. Your membership helps support educational programs and provides a base for preserving these vessels. So, join us. It's inexpensive, important, and we'd love to have you along. We'll see you at amschooner.net.
Oh my goodness. Well, we're back with Alan Mulholland and wonderful stories going on. Again, you've got a chat box to communicate with yourselves and with us. And we also have a Q&A box running. So don't be shy about entering your comments as we go. Let's pick up and let's move on, okay? What do we see?
So what we've done now, we've completed the voyage on Wave Rover, and I'll just go back and just say one thing about Wave Rover. So after I got to Martinique, that's when COVID happened, and so that was more or less the end of the trip for me. After I left Martinique, first chance I could after the winter storm, so that was May, and then I sailed directly back from Martinique all the way to Prince Edward Island without touching land. So that was probably one of the most challenging sailing passages I ever made. I mean, it's huge going from Martinique all the way to Prince Edward Island. I wouldn't have done that normally. I would have stopped in at a few places, but because it was COVID and it was the beginning of COVID, nobody knew what to do. And if I stopped anywhere, there would have been the quarantine and, potentially a whole bunch of other hoops to jump through. Even when I got to Canada, it would have made sense to stop in Halifax, but each province had its own rules. So if I stopped in Halifax, I'd have to wait 2 weeks and then go to Prince Edward Island, wait 2 weeks. So,
You decided just to tough it out. Now,
yeah.
just to clarify, this is Wave Rover 1 that we're talking
So,
about.
so Wave Rover, I just call it Wave Rover, but
Yeah.
what we're looking at now in this photo is Wave Rover II. So Wave Rover II was a concept. I thought, that was it. I wasn't going to really get involved in sailing after the big Atlantic loop. But because of the YouTube channel, there was a sense of community that had built up. And a lot of people were saying, come on, Alan, there's got to be another chapter. So I was always thinking it would be nice to build a boat, and you get, and every sailor starts putting together a list of things that are important to them. I had my list, and I wanted the boat to be smaller because I felt I didn't need a bigger boat. Now, I wasn't trying to set any record for how small. There are other people interested in that, but they tend to think of the sailor as human baggage, whereas I tend to think of seamanship still. So I want a boat no smaller than 21 feet. So that was the cutoff for me, because I still want to have room that I could sit up properly. And actually on Wave Rover II, I could stand up properly. I had more headroom on my 21 footer. And here's the thing, the
And
21
you're not a
footer,
small man.
well, I'm not that big, that's for sure. But this boat is 21 feet, but it has a plumb bow and a plumb transom, where Wave Rover, the Contessa, was like this. It was 26 feet, but it had quite the rake to the bow and the stern. Now, the waterline length of Wave Rover II and the Contessa 26 are practically the same.
Really?
The volume, but you only pay for a 21 footer when you go alongside as opposed to 26. And to anybody who's been following along a Wave Rover, they know being a frugal sailor is important to me. It's really the only way I can do these adventures. So this is being built in my shop, and the shop is 32 feet long. The boat is 21. It's in the middle of winter. I have to cover everything and use heaters on the inside because it's plywood and epoxy. It's marine grade plywood, and it's 3/8 of an inch thick.
I'm surprised you got it to cure.
Well, I mean, it was tricky. I had to, and of course, I'm working a full-time job at the local technical college, teaching carpentry to the apprentices, and then I'm also trying to build this boat and put out a weekly video. So there's a lot happening. Oh, I forgot, and I'm building a house for Mrs. Rover.
No. And you forgot you're still married.
Yeah, I worked right through that. In fact, we are living in this shop, but before the major part of the building. A quarter of this shop is a little living space, and that's where we stayed for a year and a half while I was putting the money together and the plan together to build this boat. So there's a lot of commitment, and not just from me, but from Mrs. Rover as well, as we affectionately refer to my wife.
Well, thank you, Mrs. Rover. This might be an interesting time to talk a little bit of how you were doing fundraising through social media.
Right. So we came up with this concept. We called it the benefactor's bulkhead. And it's actually that bulkhead that you're looking at there that those pine stringers go into. And it's a major bulkhead in the boat. It's where the cabin top will change direction to the foredeck. And on that bulkhead, I thought, well, we'll call it the benefactor's bulkhead, and you can have your name on there for $100. And we said, we'll limit it to 100 names. Well, it was, and I didn't know how it would go. Like we're not a huge sailing channel. We're certainly not a building channel. At that point, there were a couple of building channels, Acorn to Arabella and Samson Boatworks. They're huge. They were the rock stars of the building world. I barely made a blip on that scene, but there was an awful loyal following at this point, and the names just started pouring in. And by the time we shut it down, it was 120 subscribers had gotten their name.
That's a great story, Alan.
Yeah, and many of them have made an effort to visit me. They've sent me emails, told me stories, why they wanted their name on there, and how they felt that this project really spoke to them. So yeah, it was really important. And several times during this voyage across the Atlantic, I take a moment with the camera on the weekly videos, and I pan across those names as slowly as I can. You've got to remember the boat is bouncing around. And they've sent me messages where they say they love that. They love to see their names. And one of the names on there, by the way, is Sam Holmes from Sam Holmes Sailing, which is one of the bigger sailing channels.
Absolutely.
Apparently is a Wave Rover fan, I'm proud to say. In this photo, what we're looking at is my mast. So the mast on Wave Rover II is a round wooden mast that's freestanding. It has to be for the junk rig. And what I've done is I've purchased 2x6, construction grade 2x6, the best ones I could find, of course. And then I've scarfed them. I think it was a 1-to-12 scarf that I did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so in that picture, the next picture, you'll see them all glued up. So there's by the time, so what you end up with is a big rectangle. And after the rectangle's all glued, then I shaped it into a circle that tapers as it goes up. So it starts out, it's a good 6 inches at the base, and it's 3 inches at the top.
Wow. Pretty cool.
Oh, and I just want to point out, it was I think approximately $200 to build that mast. It was not the whole project was all around. I had laid out these requirements at the beginning of this project that, you know, it had to be accessible for anybody with a limited budget and anybody with limited skills, because I produce almost 100 videos of the whole build, from laying out the lines to, you know, doing the installation of the electrical. So it's all there. Anybody who's interested in building a boat, it's a reasonably good blueprint or manual on how to build this boat. Now, what you can see in this picture, this is the launch of Wave Rover, which was a bit of excitement in itself, because I have to take the boat from where I live in Tyne Valley all the way to Charlottetown, which is about an hour and 40 minutes by highway. And we got within about 10 miles of the Charlottetown Yacht Club to do this launch. And there were a ton of people waiting. You know, there was a fella from, I think it was Idaho, that had driven for 2 days to get there. Or it must have been more than 2 days. Oh yeah, there were people from all over who showed up for this launch. And what's more, the bishop of Prince Edward Island was there to bless the boat, which is the thing we do up here. And
that's such a great thing. Oh, fun.
Yeah, but 10 miles out, the tire blows on the trailer, and here we are, you know, so close and yet so far. I'm not a big vehicle or truck guy, so you know, I'm disappointed. I jump out of the truck. I was just a passenger. There was another friend of mine who was
for sure.
And we look at it and shake our heads. We had a chase vehicle. He got up and said, "Oh, this isn't good." And then I called ahead to Mrs. Rover, "Can you let everybody know we're going to be a bit late?" I don't know how we're going to do it at this point, because it's a weekend, and you can't get a commercial tow service to come out unless you have an established account, which we didn't know any of this stuff. So
like a Boat US membership wouldn't do it.
So anyway, we had some, what I call the Rover Navy arrive. You know, it was about 5 vehicles with guys, and they all knew what to do. You know, jacks came out, we're jacking this thing up, hammers, you know, knocking out the studs because they all broke. Running over to Canadian Tire, which is it's like an inexpensive place that sells tires and hardware. Got ourselves a new tire and new gear and put it back on and got underway again. And really, for all that, considering the amount of weight on this old trailer, it was amazing. We were probably only maybe 50 minutes to an hour late. And luckily everybody, most people stayed around, and we got the boat launched. And that's being launched right there.
That's wonderful. And you had a nice day too.
It's a nice day, and it's a bilge keeler. You should take note.
Yeah,
so it has 2 keels.
You have another picture of that, I think.
Oh, yes, I do. That's right, coming up. So there's what you look like. It's so the mast partners are the forward white circle, and that's what the mast will go through. So the mast is actually keel stepped, and those 2 white things behind, aft of right there, they're air-only vents. That's the name of them, air-only vents, and they came from the Ukraine, and the war had broken out in Ukraine, and it's where they're manufactured. They're actually manufactured in, I hope I don't butcher this too badly, Dipno City, which suffered, a missile attack shortly after I'd sent the money there. So I was thinking, I don't know if I'm ever going to see these things. And it took several weeks. It took probably 2 months for them to arrive. But when they did, I was really thankful, because they are awesome. They did not let 1 drop of water in. I mean, they let air in, but they have these little balls, little buoyancy balls all around them. And if a wave comes up, those balls raise up and shut off the air intake. So
it's like a snorkel, isn't it?
It's like a snorkel, yeah. So it's they're really effective. And I have a 3rd one on the hatch face. So that's what,
over here,
that's what I did for air. Okay, so that's and there she is under sail now. It's a tan bark sail, and it was made by another friend from a company called Superior Sales. And that's Superior Sales because he lives on Lake Superior. And he called me up and he said, listen, I love the channel. I'd like to make your sale for you. And I was delighted. I was delighted. And he was a pilot for regional airlines. And his plane was flying into Charlottetown. He rented a car and he drove the sail down and delivered it by hand to me all the way out
Wow,
here.
what kind of service is that? My goodness.
And the sail is beautiful. You see tan bark when the sun comes through it. It's it's a terrific thing.
It's just lovely.
And so this is an interesting story. So this is the Bear Creek Bridge. Bear Creek is located just outside Baltimore City in the United States on the Chesapeake Bay. And I have not been through a drawbridge before. So, and there are lots of them in this area. So I called ahead on the correct channel. I forget what channel it was now. Help me out here, Duncan. What channel?
It's probably 13.
13. Called
Probably
them,
13.
and I got nothing. Dead air.
Of
Called
course.
them time. Dead air.
Not a
Called,
flawed feature.
I went to channel 16. Nothing. So at this point, I have to put the tiller over and make a search. I got on my phone and I called the contact I had at the marina I was staying in, which is Rotobush Marina and Engine Work. And Tom said to me, oh, that's funny. They're always really good. Let me call them. And he called them by phone and got a hold of them and got back to me and said, oh, sorry, Alan, the operator just went to the bathroom and they're back in the booth now.
It happens.
Give them another try. So I called them again, and yes, they opened it up and went through. And it was a great day.
Oh, it's great fun. Great fun. There we go.
So when I got to Rotobush Engine Works, Andy Dyes, who designed Wave Rover II, he's a partner there. And that was part of the reason I ended up taking the boat there. And we had decided that I needed, let's just say, I felt I needed more stability, and I needed, she had a bit of weather helms. So we corrected all those things when I was there. And so what we're looking at here are the bilge keels. And at the bottom, you see the unpainted portion. And that's two new lead shoes that are being bolted on to the bottom of Wave Rover.
Nice.
So they're I forget exactly, I think they were 120 pounds each. So now at this point, I've sailed down the lower Chesapeake and I'm in Virginia Beach. And I mean, I had a ton of adventures before I got to Virginia Beach, but you had said no more than 30 photos. So I had a hard time selecting. I thought it'd be hard to put together 30, but
you're doing great, man.
It was dead easy. Now, the reason I stayed here was because this is a house that belongs to Rick Perks. Now, Rick Perks was in the Navy with me, and he ended up working down in Norfolk at the naval base, and then just ended up, living there. So, what a beautiful spot! Has his own.
What a great place! What a great friend to come visit. My goodness.
Yeah. He said, "Oh, listen, it's a great place to head off from." So I spent 5 great days with Rick and his family, and met a lot of his neighbors, and they were so supportive. In fact, one of his neighbors insisted that I took this porterhouse steak with me that he had barbecued, wrapped it up.
No way. Oh, that's great.
Take this with you. It'll taste good after you get going.
You could do a friend like that anytime.
Yeah. So this is me heading out. So at this point, I've cleared the most of the shipping in the Norfolk area, and I'm just heading straight out to sea. And the first order of business is just to get through the Gulf Stream, and or at least get to the edge of it, put myself in a position where if I have a contrary wind. But I did wait until I had a more of a southerly wind that was going same direction as the Gulf Stream, because I mean, what you're trying to do is you don't want to have a wind that's against the Gulf Stream. for a variety of
It's
reasons.
way too lumpy. Yeah.
Way too lumpy, and can be, quite dangerous with a small boat.
Oh, you bet.
Yeah. And this was a little segment I filmed. It's more impressive on video than photo, but I stuck the camera underwater. It's waterproof, so I was able to catch a little bit of film of what the underside was like. So you can see clearly the two keels, and everything's nice and clean. And the water is deep at this point. I can't remember exactly. It would be well over 5,000 feet.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's pretty deep.
So here's just a marvelous sunset. This would have been in the first 5 days after leaving Virginia Beach. But what you're looking at there is the Mark III. So that's what it looks like, the self-steering gear. Very easy to make, but incredibly robust. I mean, that thing can get hammered by wind and waves and just keeps on ticking because it's so simple. And
is that made out of steel?
No, it's made out of wood. But it's well designed, and everything's replaceable on it. The only thing I've ever had to do with them is change up a little bit of line. We're talking maybe $2 worth of
Alan, that's remarkable.
portage.
Yeah. That's remarkable.
Hey. These next few pictures, I'm just showing my routine at sea. So typically I eat one meal a day. We call that OMAD, one meal a day. People get a kick out of that. So, and I make the same meal day after day, which is really simple on the provision side, and it's nutritious and provides you with a really well-balanced meal that covers you for your energy. And what it is 6 eggs, and then you'll see to the top left inside that bucket. That bucket is my sink, by the way. So in there, you'll see sardines. You probably would also see a tin of mackerel and also a tin of salmon, maybe another tin of sardines. I usually put 4 tins of fish in with the 6 eggs. And then I think the next picture might show what it looks like.
Let's take a look.
And that's what it looks like when it's all cooked up. So it's like, I call it the Wave the Wave Rover seafood omelet. So
nice.
It's good and thick. It's probably 3/4 of an inch thick, and it's very nutritious. And I eat that every day, and it's
now do you pick on it?
I felt great.
Do you pick on it through the day or just eat it all at once?
I eat it all at once, no problem.
My goodness. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, listen, if you only eat once a day, you'll be hungry by the time it comes around.
Hey, there you are.
So another thing I do, and not all sailors do this by a long shot, but I shave every second day. I even cut my hair en route. And part of the reason I cut my hair is because it's really easy to keep clean then. Yeah. And I usually bathe every second day as well. Every other day, I organize one bin on the boat. So say there's 5 bins under each bunk. And, I'll take the stuff out, even though it doesn't need to be cleaned up, but it reminds me where every item on the boat is, so that in the dark, with water flooding in, I know exactly where all my tools, my fasteners, my glues, all my gear is. And that's part of the routine. I also keep the boat, as a lot of people have noticed, really shipshape. I keep it clean. And all these are components of my routine at sea, and it's important. I say to people, it keeps you happy. It keeps you
gives you purpose.
And it was something we always did in the Navy. We always said that a clean ship was a happy ship, even though people would grumble as they're in cleaning stations. But it was, when people are not busy, that's when depression begins to set in. So
sea captains have known that for years.
Right. Yeah. And so as a solo sailor, you're the sea captain of one.
Yeah.
But it's still the same routine.
They still got to push the crew.
Yeah. So that's a horrible picture of me. And it wasn't supposed to be a picture of me. This is a screen grab from a video. And what I'm trying to show is what the boat looks like when it's fully reefed. So that's a junk sail that's fully reefed there. That's I've got I've got 5 reef points, and the 5th one is in at that point. My next reefing system at that point would be to take the sail and just use the bundle sail itself as a sail, and it would be like under bare poles heading down.
How much wind are you dealing with here?
Oh gosh, there's that's very little sail. That would be probably about the equivalent of a sheet of plywood, or maybe 1.5 sheets of plywood. And the reason I say that is almost everybody's held a sheet of plywood up, and just a little bit of wind, you can feel the pressure.
You get blown over, you bet.
And there we are. We're just approaching Ireland. And it was remarkably, it was a sunny day. We didn't get a lot of them when I was in Ireland, although the atmosphere was absolutely warm and the people were just fantastic, as they were in the Azores and as they were in the United States. I mean, I have not had one bad port of call. And the number of people who either have met me or who have gone out of their way to drive to a place where I've been, it's been legion. And it's such a, and this is through the power of Wave Rover and YouTube. It's a big
deal. It's a very big deal.
On the first voyage, it didn't happen. I mean, when I got to ports, you meet people, but in this case, people were waiting to meet me. People.
Such a wonderful thing.
Oh, it was. It made it so special. And I'll tell you a second part of this. When I was born in Dublin, Ireland, and a lot of people know this story, but anybody who watches this Thursday's video is going to get this story from start to finish. But I was born in Dublin, Ireland. I was 9 years old when my family left to go to Edmonton, Alberta. We left by ship, no less. Wow. So we crossed the Atlantic on a ship, went up the St. Lawrence Seaway to Montreal, and drove from Montreal all the way to the prairies. So then all these years later, I build a boat and I sail it from Canada back to Ireland.
Full circle.
I love the symmetry of this.
It's so beautiful. My goodness gracious me. There we go. There we are.
And that's just a picture of me. I like that picture. That is just hours before we get alongside.
Very cool.
So then this is the evening after I get alongside, and that's my buddy Ray. Now, Ray was doing weather routing for me right from Virginia Beach all the way to Baltimore.
Oh, thank you, Ray.
Yeah, he lives up in Dublin. He drove all the way down. It was fantastic. You know, this is part of that community I was talking about. And super guy, very solid. And yeah, thank you.
My guess is that beer tasted awfully good.
If you're watching this, Ray, thank you very much.
There you go. That's a good tasting beer.
And so this is a little farther up the coast in Ireland. And above my head, what you're seeing are the names on the benefactor's bulkhead. Like I said, there's 120 names there, and I have paid tribute to them many times because, and I know most of them by heart, you know, because it meant a lot to me that people would, you know, reach into their own pockets and send you some money for this project. But they had their reasons, and like I said, most of them have written to me explaining what those reasons are. It's very heartwarming, really. It's very touching. Well, and now these two characters on board, they're from another junk rig boat, because I took part in a junk rig festival when I was in Ireland, and they're from a French boat. That's Eric and Christian, and there was actually four of them on that boat, and they're moored right beside me. And so on the next photo, you'll see, so we actually have 6 people on board Wave Rover, and there's room for more, but you can see 5 in the photo, and I'm up forward taking the picture. So yeah, it was good times. Very good times.
You bet. What a good time. And that's why we do it, right?
Yeah. And that's just, this is the last photo, and that's a picture of Wave Rover, at anchor in Cork. And like you would think you're in the middle of nowhere there, but I'm less than 10 miles from the city of Cork, the downtown of Cork, which is the second largest city in the Republic. So
Yeah.
I'm back home now, for people who are wondering, because the last video actually had me at sea. I've been back home for a while, and I'm enjoying Christmas with Mrs. Rover, but the boat itself is in Ireland right now.
Gotcha. So spoiler alert for those of you who think he's still at sea.
Yeah.
Alan, what a wonderful, wonderful description of your time. I had to smile. I read in the Spin Sheet article that I think you went across, you folks could see that small outboard motor on the back. I think you said you went across with 1 5-gallon container of fuel, and you had some left over when you got there.
Oh, yeah, I hardly used any fuel.
Tell us how that worked.
I still had fuel from Virginia Beach when I got up to Dublin, no less.
No, we're talking about 5-gallon jug.
Well, it was hang on a second. That was 10, 20, 30. It was 30, 35 liters, whatever that works out to.
Oh.
I think it'd be close. It'd be somewhere 7.5, 8 gallons, maybe.
Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah.
And good on you, man. Good on you. Every time my boat rolls around, it costs me another $1,000. Ah! There's a lot to be said for that. Well, what a fascinating thing. We've got some comments up here. Are you near your chat window, or I'll read them out to you?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
One person wonders, it says it looks like a drudge boat omelet. So a drudge being dredged sort of thing. And not sure I could eat only once a day. I had to respond, I hear that. And
Yeah.
Here's an interesting, why did you choose a junk rig? I bet a lot of people ask you that.
Right. So all my other boats were sloops, and I chose the junk rig. It was on the list, when I was talking to Andy Dyes, the architect, and I said, I'd like a junk rig for the simplicity. And it truly is so simple. Like when you go to reef this, it takes seconds. All you have to do is undo one rope, and the weight of the battens collapses the sail. And like you can do an emergency reef where you drop that whole thing with seconds, or you can, do it one panel at a time. I have 5 panels total. So it was, and I'll give you an example. After, I'll have to go back to my notes, but I think it was 24 days from Virginia Beach to Horta, and I was ready to go the next day, after that night's sleep. Like there was, and I attribute that to the junk rig because, in the past, after you bring a sloop in, you've been solo, you're exhausted, especially the way I used to sail. There was no roller furling, everything was hanked on and
you bet.
forward to put a reef in your jib. So it was pretty exhausting, even on a small boat. But on Wave Rover, Wave Rover II, the motion was, I think, much better in moderate seas than the Contessa. The Contessa, because of her rounded hull, would tend to roll quite a bit, where the Wave Rover II, with its Sharpie hull, with its flat bottom, was very stable until it's not. But we never got to that until it's not. It's 15 degrees. I rarely went beyond 15 degrees, but she would wallow because a lot of the sailing is downwind. But that wallowing, there's no way around it.
I get that. Now, a couple of people are curious about your windward ability in a junk rig like that.
Yeah, that's another question we get a lot. So somewhere between 50 to 55 degrees off the wind. Now, I'll put that in perspective. So my Contessa would get about the same. And I know people saying, that's not true. I've sailed Contessas, 45 degrees off the wind. I have too, in the harbor, on flat water. But when you're actually at sea, what you find are on small boats that are light, as you go into a bit of wind, those waves are hitting your bow and they're sending you off. You don't have the mass that a 50-foot schooner would have.
Well, I might point out my 50-foot schooner makes about 55 degrees too. That might be why I never win the Chesapeake Bay schooner race.
Yeah.
Jochen asked if when you lost your charts and stuff, how did you find your way? How'd you get there?
Right. I mean, I was prepared
Oh,
for
okay.
that sort of thing, but I had my old tablet. I had wrapped it in bubble wrap, and I had it in the chart table, and it had most of the charts still
Yeah,
on
I
it.
see.
So I pulled that out, booted it up, and I was good. But I also had a sketch. Sorry, no, I did the sketch after I was on my second tablet. I then did hand sketches of the entrance to the port in Martinique so that, I was ready. I also had what we called a sun gun, which is a sextant.
Yeah,
I had one on board, and it's fairly easy to get on a line of latitude and get
yeah,
yourself
and go
there.
just like they did in the old days. Oh, here's a grip. Are you circumnavigating the planet or just the Atlantic?
Well,
What are your
I'm
plans? Where are we
going to,
going next?
yeah, yeah. So I'll be tackling that over the next few weeks. There is some explanation. There's some changes coming up. I don't want to let the cat out of the bag yet because there's still some details that need to be
Well, you already
sorted
told us you're not in Ireland anymore.
out. I know, yes, but I do have the ability to go back.
I love it. I love it. Looks like we got another question over here. And yeah. What did you do about visas and clearance and stuff like that? Was that a problem?
Uh, so I learned that on the first
Yeah.
Atlantic passage. So it's tough. Europe has these draconian rules about 90 days, and that clock starts in the Azores, even though the Azores are 700
Because you're
miles
in the EU at that point.
continental. Yeah. So it's good and bad. You clear in the Azores, well, you've cleared. And the rest of Europe should be fine, although you have to let each country know you've arrived.
Yeah.
But 90 days. And so when I got to the Canaries and I was ready to leave the Canaries, yeah, my 90
Clock was
days,
ticking. Yeah.
I was probably a few days over, but it was kind of loosey goosey in
Yeah.
I wouldn't try it again unless you had to. Like I was waiting for a weather window. But this time around, having been born in Ireland, turns out that I have dual citizenship.
Oh,
So
perfect.
yeah, so I was actually traveling on an Irish passport when I was in Ireland, and Ireland's part of the EU, so I had no problem. I could
Nice.
stay as long as I want. But that is a good concern. That's an excellent question. You just
Yeah.
can't go to these places. And in fact, you just can't go to any port either. You have to, people don't understand this,
You
you
got to
have
go
to go
clear.
to a clearance port when you
Yeah.
get to a country. So you have to look this up. What is a clearance port? And when you get there, just don't run ashore, and go for an ice cream. You've got to make sure you get a hold of a port captain or a port authority and announce your presence.
That's right. Now, before I let you go, you have to tell me the story about the steel hat.
Oh well, so I had this. I bought a still saw
Yeah.
and used it, before I. They gave me two when I bought the saw, and so I love those hats. They were really
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
And when I was building Wave Rover, I'm always wearing one of the two hats,
There you go.
and one would get laundered because it gets covered in dust, and those became my work hats. And everybody started noticing it after a while on the videos. And there was one person who said that hat is looking terrible because they were all ripped and they had glue
Yeah.
stains on them. And he said, I used to work for Still. Let me go in and talk to them. And so he went in, and I'm pretty sure he probably bought them himself and sent me three Still hats. And
Oh,
so it was one of a few hats I would wear on board Wave Rover II for this last trip. The Still hat, and also HMCS Winnipeg, which was a ship that my brother was captain of. So that was another hat I would wear.
oh, how cool is that? Well, we are running out of time here, my friend. I can't believe how quickly it's gone. It's
What? This has
awesome.
only been 10 minutes or so.
It's crazy. Hey, before we go, I want you to try and put a little button on it. Couple things to answer. Would you do it again? What's
Oh,
over the horizon? And, just kind of say hi to everybody. This is a great example of why we do these sorts of interviews. You meet people. The world is not as bad as we hear every single day.
Oh, I would I do it again? Absolutely. This is my fourth ocean crossing in a small boat solo, and I would encourage people to watch this week's video, because after I arrive in Ireland, there is so much gratitude in my heart for. Well, I say it never gets old. You know, you anybody who says, "Oh, you know, I've crossed the ocean so many times," it's routine. I don't know what they're talking about, because each one is special. There's only so many you're ever going to get a chance to do. It's in a small boat solo. In a small boat solo that you've built yourself. Oh my goodness. I mean,
Yeah.
talk about a dream come true, you know, for anybody. I mean, I am. It's a privilege. It's a huge privilege, and it's also humbling to have this many people interested in the voyage. It's a thing that you don't see coming, you know, and then it arrives,
Yeah.
and that's the humbling bit. Is, you know, wow.
Well,
It's
you're
and
doing
I'm
something we're
grateful.
all interested in, I'll tell you that.
Well, I'm very grateful. You know, there's sailing's always going to be part of my life.
Yeah.
Um, as I say at the end of every video I make, I say, forge your own adventure, and that's the unofficial motto of Wave Rover, and everybody can understand that at whatever level you're at. You know, if forge your own adventure means, you know, writing a book or riding a bike or hopping in a boat and sailing around the world, whatever it means to you, just get out there and do it. I
Just
think
do
is
it.
the,
Yeah.
yeah.
Just
And this is where I do the shout out to Lynn and Larry Party, because their books were so important to me. This is back in the in the 80s that I discovered them,
that's a long time ago.
and they had their motto, which was go well,
Go,
let's see.
go something or something, but go now.
Yeah, yeah, it was go simple, no, go small, go simple, go now.
Yeah, that's right.
Something like that. And it was
Yeah.
beautiful. It was eloquent, and it really encouraged you to dig, you know, and
And the
be
point
your
is,
best self.
you don't need millions of dollars. What you need
Oh,
is just the drive to do it. That's
oh, absolutely. If anything, and I've said this so many times, the smaller the boat, the bigger the adventure, you know.
yeah,
And another thing I say in the channel, and people might be getting sick of hearing this, but what you lack in resources, you make up for with resourcefulness. And these are things that I live my life by, not just in the sailing, but, you know, in the
yeah.
way I've built houses for my wife and I. We live on a little homestead here. It's all part of that forge your own adventure.
It
And I
really
think,
is.
especially as men, but not necessarily just men, I mean, it's in our DNA
Yeah,
to forge your own adventure.
I think you're right. Well, I'm so glad you brought up Lynn because we'll be interviewing her in a few weeks now.
Fantastic.
Very, very exciting to have this little crossover here. Alan, what a super pleasure. Tell us your YouTube channel so people can follow along.
So if you go on YouTube, type in Rover's Adventure. That's just that simple. Rover's Adventure. That'll take you to the channel page. And I think we're on our fourth season now. So there's
Isn't that
plenty of
exciting?
videos to choose. We're coming up in 300 videos.
Rover's Adventure. I love it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. What a pleasure. Oh my God. This will be edited and up on our websites in probably about 2 days. You'll find it on gcbsr.org, Great Chesapeake Bay Schooner Race, and of course, amschooner.net. And of course, Alan's going to have something up anyway. And by then, he should have arrived back from Ireland. So I'm looking forward to that.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for having me on, Duncan. It
It's
has
really
been a pleasure.
such a
I
pleasure.
I hope I didn't bore too many people. Thank you very much.
You didn't. Thank you, my friend. I'll call you in just a minute.
Okay.
Good night, everybody. I will look forward to seeing you all next time we're here with our friend Lynn Party. Take care.